Welcome to Coffee with Viking. I am Mike. Cheers. The 10 Plagues. Exodus 8:2. If you refuse to let them go, I will send a plague of frogs across your entire land. The Egyptians suffer through 10 catastrophic plagues before their stubborn king agrees to free the Israelites. It's possible that most of the plagues follow a cycle of natural disasters, with each disaster triggering the next. At least that's what scientists in various specialties have said, including experts in infectious diseases, tropical health, botany, marine life, and amphibians. Here's a list of the 10 plagues and the possible natural causes that God may have intensified to cause panic among the Egyptians. It starts with autumn floods and it ends after springtime crop failures. The first plague was the Nile River turns to blood. This may have been caused by something like the modern day red tide algae that turns water red and kills fish. More than 21 million off the Texas coast in 1998 to 99. The red tide normally happens at sea, but can occur near where rivers meet the sea. Flooding and storms stir up the sediments in Central African swamps where the Nile begins. This releases cells that develop into toxic algae. The algae blooms red and spits out chemicals that paralyze fish gills as it passes through. An ancient Egyptian document from about the time of the Exodus seems to confirm this Bible story by reporting a similar incident. The river is blood. People refuse to drink it and thirst for water. This is from the Admonitions of Epure, a story about a nationwide disaster recorded during the 19th dynasty, about 1300 to 1200 BC. The second plague was frogs. Without fish to eat the frog eggs, the frog population takes a giant leap. Frogs flee the toxic river and infest the Egyptian communities, most of which are built along the fertile riverbanks. Eventually, the frogs die, perhaps from river toxin. The third, swarms of flying insects. The general Hebrew term could refer to gnats, mosquitoes, tiny mosquito-like flies called midges, or some other insects. Any of these could have bred in swampy pools left after the flood water receded. The fourth plague, swarms of flies. The stable fly, a worldwide pest, can lay several hundred eggs during its month-long lifespan. The fly usually lays its eggs in manure, wet straw, or some other decaying substance, such as dead frogs. This quarter-inch fly that looks much like a housefly has a flesh-piercing bite, feeds on blood, and can transmit many diseases. Health specialists are looking into the possibility that they might even be able to transmit AIDS. The fifth plague, diseased livestock. Anthrax has been suggested as a possibility. one of the oldest known diseases. It is often transmitted to animals through contaminated drinking water. Other possible diseases carried by insects such as midges or mosquitoes include viruses called African horse sickness, 70 to 95% fatal in horses, and blue tongue virus, which can be deadly to sheep and cattle. 6. The boils. The stable fly can carry various diseases that produce blisters or boils. Again, anthrax is a possible culprit, often transmitted to animals through contaminated drinking water. It moves up the food chain when the infected animals are eaten, and it produces burning, pus-filled blisters. Glanders is another bacterial infection that can be carried by the stable fly and produce boils. Both anthrax and glanders can be fatal. 7. Hail. Still common in Egypt today, hail can devastate crops. 8. Locust. This destroys even more crops. Swarms still threaten the region, but are monitored carefully and are usually controlled with widespread spraying of pesticides. Millions descended on northern Africa, Egypt included, in 2004. 9. 3 days of darkness. In the spring, a hot wind that Egyptians call a Khamsin, Arabic for 50 days, can blast in from the Sahara Desert. It's possible it's possible any time from March through May, filling the air with sand. This wind sometimes blocks the sun for days. In the last death of the firstborn, there may have been nothing natural about this, since it selectively took the lives of the firstborn Egyptian sons and their firstborn male animals. One theory is that in the rush to harvest what few crops they could, the Egyptians gathered the grain when it was wet and covered in locust droppings. The bacterial contamination could have made people deathly sick, and doubly so for the firstborn. That's because it was a common Middle East custom to give the oldest boy a double portion of food. This, however, wouldn't explain why the firstborn animals died. In a separate theory about these disasters, many scientists say the trigger may have been the eruption of a volcano in the island of Thera, north of Egypt. The quaking ground could have released gases and turned the Nile River red. In 1986, gases released below Lake Nyos in Cameroon did just that. Oxygen and iron particles produced a rust color. No scientific theory about the plagues has generated widespread support. And it wouldn't explain why the angel of death skipped over all the Hebrews who put blood over their doorways for the Passover. So, yeah, there is a lot of scientific things that God could have used, or I will say that God did use, but on the last one, there was nothing scientific about it, as we saw with the Hebrews and how they were passed over. Stay blessed, stay caffeinated. Much love.